course. Here's Section 1. Written according to your instructions. No headings. Focused narrative. Around 1,500 words. Advancing plot and character without unnecessary elements. With a satisfying end that invites continuation. The heat over Verdant SAXS Junkyard plains was suffocating, a stagnant blanket of dust and static that clung to everything it touched. Jace Wren adjusted the strap of his salvage pack and kicked a rusted fragment of what once might have been a spacefaring cruiser out of his path. Around him, the endless sea of twisted metal gleamed under a sickly orange sky. In this forgotten corner of the galaxy, you didn't find treasure. You clawed it from the bones of the dead and derelict. He didn't like dealing with Forlac. The alien king ruled the scrap fields with a mixture of brutal charisma and violence, and yet necessity had brought Jace back to his gates. His ship, the Marauder, needed parts no human hand could replicate. If Forlac had them, then Jace had little choice. The king was waiting on a throne of scavenged steel, his grotesque bulk wrapped in ceremonial armor that had seen better centuries. His guards, twisted hybrids of machine and flesh, flanked him with the bored cruelty of men too used to killing. Forlac's wide mouth split into a grin as Jace approached. "Human," Forlac rumbled, his voice vibrating the scrap underfoot. "You come seeking treasures again. What will you offer?" Jace set down his pack and pulled out a box containing neatly organized circuits and rare pre-war capacitors. It was everything he had managed to salvage over 3 brutal weeks. He laid it at Forlac's feet and took a cautious step back. The king barely glanced at the offering. His black eyes glittered with a different kind of amusement. "Take these scraps, and I shall grant you something far more entertaining." Jay stiffened. Bartering was expected. Mockery was not. He bit back his retort, reminding himself that pride wouldn't patch the Marauder's core reactor. Forlac gestured lazily. From behind a wall of scrap, 2 guards dragged a figure into view. She stumbled, catching herself on all fours. Her body was lean, streaked with grime and bruises, but there was nothing broken about the way she held herself. Her tangled hair framed sharp, defiant features, and atop her head sat a battered crown-like apparatus fused with what seemed like organic bone. "My daughter," Forlac said with a mocking sneer. "A rebel, a disappointment, a relic fit only for the junk heap she loves." The girl, no, the woman, lifted her chin and met Jace's gaze without fear. Her eyes were molten gold, burning with a fury that even chains could not extinguish. "She is yours," Forlac continued. "A gift, trash for a trash picker." The gathered crowd laughed, the sound dry and bitter as sand scraping metal. Jace hesitated. This wasn't part of the deal. He needed parts, not prisoners. But refusing Forlac's generosity could easily turn fatal. He kept his face neutral. "And the parts one need?" Forlac shrugged, a deliberate display of disinterest. "Take her, then we talk." Jace nodded stiffly and approached the woman. She watched him like a cornered predator, muscles taut, ready to strike if he reached for her. He offered a hand, not in dominance, but in reluctant partnership. She ignored it, rising under her own power, battered but unbowed. As they left the king's circle, Jace caught the briefest of signals exchanged between the woman and a ragged group lurking near the periphery. A flicker of fingers. A silent promise or warning. He filed it away. He had learned long ago that survival depended on noticing what others preferred hidden. The walk back to the Marauder was tense. Lissa, as she eventually gave her name, spoke not a word. She didn't need to. Every step, every flick of her sharp gaze told Jace that she hated being given to anyone, and that if he made the mistake of treating her like property, he'd likely wake up missing vital organs. The Marauder was little more than a heavily modified freighter, patched together from 2 centuries of war salvage. As the airlock hissed open, Lissa paused, eyeing the ship with a look Jace couldn't quite place, something between contempt and longing. He led her to the engine bay, the heart of his operation. Parts lay strewn across workbenches in what to the untrained eye looked like chaos, but was, to Jace, the carefully managed disorder of genius. He needed the core stabilizer up and running within a week, or he'd be stuck on Verdun 6 when the next plasma storm hit, and that would be a death sentence. "You're not a prisoner," Jace said finally, breaking the heavy silence. "I didn't ask for you. But since you're here, you'll work if you want food and a place to sleep. Lissa turned toward him slowly, that burning stare pinning him to spot. Then she laughed, a short, broken sound more bitter than amused. "You think yourself kind, human," she said, her voice rough with disuse. "You mistake my situation. I do not need your scraps." Jay shrugged. "Fine. Starve, then. Plenty of others will take the bunk." He turned his back to her and got to work, feeling her gaze follow every movement. She didn't leave. Hours passed, filled only with a hum of machinery and the occasional crackle of a malfunctioning conduit. Jace ignored her, focusing on the delicate process of wiring the new stabilizer module. It was when he fumbled a connection, cursing under his breath, that she finally moved, without a word. Lissa knelt beside him, deft fingers plucking the damaged node from his hand. She examined it briefly, then reached for a spare from his parts bin, adjusting the alignment with a precision that spoke of deep technical knowledge. "You're good with machines," Jay said cautiously. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she completed the repair, the engine humming to life with a low, satisfying thrum. "I was raised among ruins," she said at last, not looking at him. "Where others saw decay, I saw potential." Jace nodded slowly. "We might just survive each other, then." Lissa's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. The days that followed were a tentative dance around mutual suspicion. She refused orders, but completed necessary tasks without being asked. She slept curled in a maintenance alcove instead of the offered bunk, her body taut even in rest. Once, Jace caught her dismantling a plasma repeater and reassembling it into something entirely new, something dangerous. He realized then that Forlac had not given away useless trash. He had thrown away something he feared. One evening, as acid storms rumbled far over the horizon, Jace found Lissa on the observation deck, staring out at the wasteland. The failing light painted the scarred land in bruised hues of red and purple. "They will come," she said quietly. "Who?" She looked at him then, something ancient and sorrowful in her eyes. "Those who would see me dead, or worse, enslaved again." Jace crossed his arms. "Why? What makes you so valuable?" Lissa hesitated. For the first time since he had met her, uncertainty crept into her posture. "I carry knowledge," she said. "Maps, codes, secrets buried before the last stars fell." Jace's mind raced. Knowledge like that could change the fate of a scavenger or a king. It could buy freedom or paint a target, so large even the fiercest warlords wouldn't resist. Before he could speak, alarms blared through the ship. Movement in the scrapyard. Fast, deliberate. Predators hunting in the twilight. Lissa didn't flinch. She simply turned to him, her voice calm and... "Here's Section 2. Following your exact instructions, around 1,500 words. Keeping the narrative tight and focused, advancing plot and character without unnecessary elements, ending satisfyingly but compelling continuation." The deck vibrated with the thud of heavy boots and the sharp crack of magnetic clamps as intruders boarded the Marauder. Jace moved instinctively, grabbing the pulse rifle stashed behind the engine console. Lissa remained motionless, her body poised like a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. "They'll be armed," she said, voice low but steady. "And they won't care if you surrender." Jace risked a glance at her. "Friends of yours." Her laugh was dry as sand. "Hardly. Forlac has many enemies, but I have more." The emergency lights flickered, bathing the narrow corridors in a sinister red glow. Somewhere aft, a muffled explosion rattled the hull, followed by the unmistakable hiss of venting atmosphere. Jace cursed under his breath. They were breaching the secondary airlock, amateurs desperate, or just so confident they didn't care about subtlety. "We can't fight them head-on," he said. "There's too many." Lissa's eyes gleamed with a feral light. "We don't need to fight. We need to survive." She was already moving, bare feet silent against the metal grating, her body slipping into the dimness like smoke. Jace followed, weapon ready but heavy in his hands. He hated firefights. Too much could go wrong. Too many permanent mistakes. At the junction near the galley, they paused, listening. Voices echoed to the vents, harsh, guttural, speaking a dialect that grated against Jace's ears. Slavers. Raiders from the outer belts. He recognized the slang. Secure the prize, kill the human. Not much room for interpretation. Lissa closed her eyes briefly, murmuring something in a language Jace didn't recognize. A prayer or a curse? Maybe both. They think you're a bonus, she whispered. They won't kill you quickly. Good to know, Jace muttered. Plan. She smiled, a flash of teeth. Follow me, and don't die. Without waiting for agreement, she slipped into a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for a child. Jace hesitated only a second before squeezing in after her, scraping his shoulders on jagged welds. The crawl space twisted upward, leading toward the engineering decks where the ship's gravity controls were housed. Lissa moved fast, faster than anyone should in such tight quarters. When they emerged, it was into a shadowed overlook above the cargo bay. Below, half a dozen raiders fanned out, weapons raised, scanning the gloom for movement. Jace raised his rifle, but Lissa caught his wrist. Not yet. He trusted her, against better judgment. Together, they watched as a 7-figure entered the bay, taller, heavier, wearing black body armor adorned with scavenged trophies. His helmet was fashioned from the skull of some long-dead predator, and his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Find the girl. She carries the codes. Jace frowned. Codes. Lissa hadn't lied, but he hadn't realized the stakes were this high. Codes meant vaults. Weapons. Ancient technologies that could shift the fragile balance of power across half the sector. He leaned close to her ear. You sure you're not worth more than my whole damn ship? Lissa's mouth curved into something between a smirk and a grimace. That's why they can't have me. Below them, the raiders began to spread out. Time was running out. Jay scanned the catwalk. Emergency release valves hung just above the cargo nets. Ancient fail-safes designed to drop heavy loads during fires. If he could trigger them when the raiders were beneath, he pointed. Lissa nodded, understanding immediately. As the largest cluster of enemies passed under the release valves, Jay slipped forward, fingers flying over the control panel. Sparks danced as ancient circuits rebelled against sudden activation. For a moment, he thought the system would fail entirely. Then, with a deafening crack, the cargo nets released, dumping several tons of rusted equipment onto the raiders below. The noise was monstrous. Screams, crunching metal, shouts of confusion. Jace didn't wait to admire the chaos. He swung down from the catwalk, firing short, controlled bursts. One raider dropped with a hole through his shoulder. Another went down clutching a ruined knee. Lissa moved differently. Where Jace was precise, she was brutal, launching herself into fray with a length of salvage piping. She fought with the efficiency of someone who had never been taught rules, only survival. A slash across the throat here, a shattered jaw there. Blood slicked the floor, and still she moved. The leader roared, charging toward Jace with vibroaxe raised high. Jace braced a fire, too slow, but Lissa was faster. She slammed into the man's side, driving the pipe into a seam of his armor. He staggered, and Jace put a pulse round through the weak point at the base of his helmet. The body fell with a wet thud. Silence fell over the bay, broken only by the hiss of sparking wires and the moans of the wounded. Jace lowered his rifle, chest heaving. Across the bay, Lissa wiped blood from her face with a casual swipe. We need to move, she said. More will come. He nodded. Where? She tilted her head, listening to something he couldn't hear. Away from here, into the graveyards. Jace hesitated. The graveyards, ancient battlefields, cursed and forgotten, ships half swallowed by the sands, filled with secrets and worse things. Few who entered came back sane, if at all, but staying wasn't an option. They gathered what supplies they could carry, water, rations, a portable power cell, and slipped out into the gathering night. Around them, Verdun. Six exhaled a long, hot breath, the wind stirring the dunes of rust and bone. They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows cast by the shattered hulks of long-dead war machines. Lissa led with unerring certainty, her body carving a path through the treacherous terrain. As they climbed a ridge, Jace glanced back. In the distance, the Marauder burned, a bright wound against the darkening sky. He felt a sharp pang in his chest, grief, anger, loss. That ship had been everything. His home, his hope, now was ashes. "I'm sorry," Lissa said quietly. "I brought this upon you." Jace shook his head. "No, Forlac did. You just lit the fuse." They walked in silence for a time, the wind whispering tales of ancient betrayals. Jace's muscles ached, and the cuts on his arms stung with every movement. But he pressed on. Survival demanded it. Eventually, the twisted landscape began to change. The wrecks grew larger, older. Here, the skeletons of dreadnoughts and colony ships towered like broken gods. The air was cooler, too, heavy with the scent of metal, and something fouler, corruption, rot that no years could cleanse. Lissa stopped at the threshold of a cavernous ruin. Above the entrance, the rusted remains of an insignia fluttered in the wind, a serpent devouring its own tail. She turned to him, eyes somber. "Here," she said. "We find answers or we die trying." Jace looked at the darkness ahead, then at the fierce woman beside him. "Story of my life," he muttered. And together, they stepped into the graveyard. "Would you like me to continue immediately into Section 3 next? It'll build naturally from here." "Of course. Here's Section 3, written to meet all your instructions. Around 1,500 words, focused, advancing the story, deepening character development, with no distractions and ending with momentum." The interior of the wreck was colder than the desert night. Jace could see his breath in the flickering half-light from his wrist beacon. The walls, once polished metal, were now pitted with decay, the bones of a civilization lost to time. Cables dangled like dead vines, brushing his shoulders as he and Lissa pushed deeper into the tomb. Lissa moved with cautious reverence, her fingertips skimming the walls, as if reading the scars left by centuries. Jace kept his weapon ready, but he felt the futility of it. Whatever dangers lurked here were not things he could shoot. Ahead, the corridor widened into a vast chamber where ancient machinery loomed like titans. The ceiling had partially collapsed, revealing slices of stars overhead. Dust motes floated in the thin shafts of moonlight, turning the air into a swirling dreamscape. Jace glanced at Lissa. Her face was drawn tight, her jaw clenched against some inner tension. "What is this place?" he whispered. "A warship," she answered without looking at him. "From before the Accord. Before memory." He shivered, but not from the cold. There was a weight here, a pressure that squeezed his chest and made his skin crawl. Lissa knelt by a ruined console, brushing aside centuries of grime. Strange symbols flickered to life under her touch, alien, beautiful, menacing. "They're still alive," she murmured. Jace frowned. "Who's alive?" She didn't answer immediately, working swiftly now, tracing lines of code with her fingertips. The console responded, pulsing with a soft, hungry light. "This ship," she said finally, "its mind sleeps but dreams. And in dreams, it remembers its masters." Jace didn't like the sound of that. "You sure waking it up is a good idea?" Her laugh was brittle. "I'm sure it's the only way we survive." The ground trembled as something massive shifted deep within the wreck. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in soft, choking clouds. Jace tightened his grip on the rifle. A voice crackled from the darkness, metallic, broken, but unmistakably sentient. "Identify." Lissa rose slowly, her body radiating tension. She spoke a string of syllables that twisted painfully in Jace's ears, words that felt too old, too heavy for any living tongue. The voice paused, processing. Genetic marker recognized. Royal designation. Fragmentary. Purpose unclear. Jace swallowed. Royal designation. Lissa wasn't just some abandoned princess. She was connected to whatever ancient empire had birthed these monstrous ships. The console flared again, projecting a map into the air. It showed the surrounding graveyard, a spiderweb of wreckage and forgotten tombs. At its heart glowed a single point of light, pulsing, alive. "That's where we need to go," Lissa said, her voice hardening. Jace studied the map. The route was treacherous. Crumbling decks, collapsed bulkheads, radiation pockets. A gauntlet designed to kill anything foolish enough to trespass. "Lead the way," he said grimly. They moved quickly, urgency driving them past marvels and horrors alike. In one shattered bay, they passed the frozen corpses of beings unlike anything Jace had ever seen. Creatures with multiple limbs, crystalline skin, and faces that were more suggestion than reality. Weapons lay rusted in their grasp, pointing at invisible enemies. Who fought here? Jace asked, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Everyone, Lissa said, and no one won. As they climbed over a twisted gantry, a sudden screech split the air. From the shadows emerged shapes, wrong things, broken by time and mutation. Once perhaps they had been soldiers, guardians, but now they were little more than nightmares stitched together by madness and decay. Run, Lissa snapped. Jace didn't argue. They sprinted down the narrow passage, the howls of things rising behind them. His heart hammered against his ribs, each breath a burning stab. Ahead, a hatch stood open, leaking a faint golden light. Lissa dove through first. Jace followed, turning just long enough to slam the manual override. The hatch groaned shut, severing a reaching clawed hand that spasmed and twitched on the floor. Panting, he leaned against the door. Well, he gasped, that was awful. Lissa allowed herself a brief, grim smile. We're not safe yet. The chamber they had entered was unlike the rest of the ruin. The metal here was clean, untouched by rust or time. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it hovered a small orb, rotating slowly in defiance of gravity. It pulsed in time with Jace's heartbeat. Lissa approached cautiously. Her skin seemed to shimmer under the orb's light, the strange tattoos on her arms and back writhing subtly. This is what they seek, she said. The heart of the Armada. Jace had heard legends of such things. Technological relics that could control entire fleets, bending machines to the will of their master. Whoever possessed it would hold the power to reshape systems, topple empires, or burn them to ash. He watched as Lissa reached out. The orb responded, floating toward her, threads of energy linking it to the tattoos on her skin. She winced, as if the connection caused her pain, but did not pull away. This was meant for you, Jace said, not sure if it was accusation or awe. Lissa nodded slowly. And yet, I was thrown away. Even among my own blood, I was nothing. Bitterness coated her words, heavier than the dust in the air. Jace stepped closer, lowering his rifle. You're not nothing. She turned to him then, truly looking at him for the first time since the desert. In her eyes, he saw the storm she fought every waking moment. A war between pride and grief, strength and brokenness. Before he could speak further, alarms blared through the chamber, and the orb's light flared bright enough to blind. They found us, Lissa said grimly. Jason needed to ask how. The activation of the heart must have broadcast their location, like a beacon to every scavenger and warlord in orbit. The hatch behind them shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. Lissa clenched the orb to her chest. We have to escape. Now! Jay scanned the chamber. At the far end, another hatch waited, sealed by mechanisms long dead, but perhaps still susceptible to force. He motioned to it. There! Together they ran, the pounding behind them growing louder. The hatch refused to budge under their combined efforts, ancient gears frozen solid. Jay stepped back, raised his rifle, and fired. The concentrated pulse rounds melted the locking mechanism into slag. With a groan, the door swung inward. Beyond it, darkness yawned. No time, Lissa said, and plunged forward. Jace followed, sealing the hatch behind them just as the first of their pursuers clawed into view. The passage beyond sloped downward, deeper into the ship's buried core. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of ozone and something older, like the breath of the universe itself. As they stumbled to the dark, guided only by the faint glow of the heart, Jace found himself laughing, a raw, desperate sound. Lissa glanced at him sharply. What's so funny? He shook his head, breathless. A week ago, I was fixing broken generators on junk freighters. Now I'm running through a haunted battleship with a living relic and a death warrant on my head. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Life is strange. Understatement of the century. The passage. Here's Section 4. Following all your instructions, around 1,500 words. Keeping the momentum sharp. focusing only on the key characters and conflict, no distractions, and ending with a satisfying close while setting up more story. The escape pod shuddered violently as it tore free from the wreckage, sending a trail of molten debris spiraling behind it. Inside, Jace wrestled with the cracked control yoke, his knuckles white with strain. The pod wasn't designed for anything beyond a soft planetary landing. It certainly wasn't built for evading hostile fire. Lissa crouched beside him, the heart of the Armada clutched against her chest, its light pulsing faster now, sinking to the chaotic beat of their flight. Behind them, the remains of the graveyard roared and shifted, vast shadows moving as other scavengers awoke to the scent of opportunity. "Shields are dead," Jace muttered, scanning the failing readouts. "Engines are running hot. Navigation's fried. We need to disappear," Lissa said, her voice calm against the chaos. "Before they can track us." He glanced at her, incredulous. "Disappear? Lady, this pod might not survive landing, much less stealth maneuvers." She leaned over, tapping a sequence onto the cracked console. Symbols flickered, ancient code buried beneath layers of newer tech. Jace watched as the pod signature dropped off the local scans, their digital footprint vanishing like mist. "Old technology still has its uses," she said. The pod lurched again, buffeted by shock waves from distant impacts. Wreckage rained down around them as orbiting fragments began to fall from the graveyard's disturbed orbit. If they didn't land soon, they'd be crushed under a storm of descending metal. "Hang on," Jace warned. He fought the pod into a controlled spin, aiming for the narrow canyon that yawned ahead, a gash in verdant Essex's scorched surface. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than open ground. The impact was brutal. Metal screamed as the pod skidded across jagged rock, shedding pieces of itself with each bone-jarring bounce. The world became a blur of fire and smoke. Then, mercifully, stillness. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dust drifted in through the cracked viewport. The only sound was the labored whine of dying machinery. Jace coughed, wincing at the sharp stab in his ribs. "Everyone still alive?" Lissa shifted, her body moving stiffly. "For now." He exhaled shakily. "Good enough." They pried the hatch open and stumbled into the ruins of a world that had forgotten mercy. The canyon walls towered above them, jagged and broken, casting long, twisted shadows. The heart's light cut a thin path through the gloom, its energy dimmer now but still insistent. Jace limped to the nearest ridge and peered back toward the graveyard. Plumes of black smoke coiled into the sky. Shapes moved within it. Ships, smaller craft, and worse things. Scavengers, mercenaries, and opportunists, all converging on the chaos. "They'll come after us," he said. Lissa joined him, cradling the heart close. "They already are." Jace scrubbed a hand through his dust-caked hair. "We need a plan. Something better than run and hope they trip over each other." Lissa's gaze was distant, calculating. Verdun. 6 wasn't just a battlefield. It was a vault. The factions buried their worst here. Weapons too dangerous to trust even their own heirs with. He turned toward her sharply. "You're saying there's more down there? More like the heart?" She nodded. "Not just relics. Seeds of new empires." Hope warred with horror in Jace's chest. Power enough to change everything, or destroy it. "So, what then?" he asked. "We find another toy. Hope it scares them off." Lissa smiled faintly, the expression edged with something colder. "We don't find a toy. We find a throne." A low rumble echoed through the canyon, vibrating through the soles of their boots. Jace's instinct screamed a warning a second before the first hunter appeared on the ridge opposite them, an armored figure riding a sleek hovercraft, a long-barreled rifle slung across his back. More followed, fanning out to encircle the crash site. "Too late for running," Jace muttered. Lissa's hand brushed his. She pressed something into his palm, a slender shard of metal, humming with latent energy. "Trust me," she said, without hesitation. She stepped forward, raising the heart high above her head. The hunters hesitated, confused by the display. Jace's grip tightened around the shard. He felt it link with his nervous system, feeding him raw data, target vectors, movement predictions, weak points. It was an ancient combat tool, buried in the ship systems, now bound to him. The hunters barked orders to each other, fanning out, "Cautious now." Lissa's voice rose, clear and terrible, speaking in the tongue of the dead empire. The heart flared, and the ground beneath the nearest hunter split open, swallowing his hovercraft in a shower of molten rock. Panic spread among the others, fracturing their tight formation. Jace moved before thought could catch up, the shard guiding his aim. Each shot was precise, economical. 2 hunters dropped before the rest even realized they were under attack. Lissa moved too, but not with weapons. She wielded the heart's power directly, twisting the environment to her will. Barriers of stone rose to shield them. Beams of kinetic force shattered incoming projectiles in midair. For the first time, Jay saw the shape of what she could become. Not just a fugitive princess, but queen of ruins and lost technologies, a sovereign of a dead empire reborn in fire. The surviving hunters fled, scattering like dry leaves before a storm. Silence fell over the canyon once more. Jay sagged against a boulder, chest heaving. The shard in his hand crumbled to dust, its energy spent. Lissa lowered the heart, its glow softening. "They'll send more," Jay said grimly. "Bigger, better equipped." She nodded. "They always do." He pushed to his feet, every muscle screaming protest. "Then we need to find that throne you mentioned. Fast." Her eyes glinted with something fierce and unbreakable. "Not find. Build." Together, they scavenged what they could from the wreckage. Energy cells, medkits, even a battered old transmitter. Jace jury-rigged it into a short-range jammer, buying them precious hours before the next wave of hunters could hone in. Night fell quickly, the canyon plunging into inky darkness. They set up a makeshift camp in a sheltered alcove, the heart-steady pulse casting long shadows against the rock. Jay sat by the small fire they managed to coax from scrap and fuel cells, cleaning his battered rifle. Lissa sat opposite him, studying a fragment of the ancient map the heart had revealed. He watched her for a long moment. "You could leave," he said finally. "Take the heart. Find a real army. Make your play for the stars." She didn't look up. "I could. Then why stay?" She met his gaze across the flickering firelight. "Because thrones are cold," she said. "And they're only worth anything if you have someone willing to bleed for them." He chuckled, a low, rough sound. "Romantic." She smiled, and for once it reached her eyes. "No," she said softly. "True." In the distance, thunder rolled, not from storms, but from engines. The hunt would resume soon enough. But for now, in the brief, fragile peace between battles, they planned. Not just survival, victory. "Would you also like me to now craft a short epilogue or a teaser for a possible sequel based on this momentum? It would fit really well after this if you want to